I always knew that I was the second best daughter in the family. It wasn't something my parents ever talked about directly, they didn't need to. Their actions spoke louder than any words. My brother David was their golden child, their firstborn, their pride and joy. He was 2 years older than me, and he couldn't seem to do anything wrong in their eyes. I remember when he was a kid, he broke my mom's favorite vase while playing baseball in the living room. Instead of punishing him, Mom just smiled and said, "Boys are boys. At least you're practicing your punch, darling." But when I accidentally spilled juice on the carpet a week later, the reaction was completely different. "Edwidge, how could you be so careless?" Mom's voice rang in my ears, even years later. "Go get the cleaning supplies right now. And no leaving the house for the weekend." These double standards became the backdrop of my childhood. David could bring back a mediocre grade from school, and the parents would just shrug their shoulders. "He's just focused on sports right now." But if my grade was just 1 point below excellent, they wouldn't even look up from their phones. You can achieve more if you try harder. The only person who has really seen me, who has seen the real me, is my grandmother. She lived just a few blocks away, and her house became a refuge for me. Of course, she also loved David, brought him homemade cookies, went to all his football matches. But unlike my parents, she noticed me too. It went on year after year. David's birthdays were celebrated on a grand scale, inflatable trampolines, dozens of friends, gorgeous cakes, loud music. And mine? At best, the parents remembered them in the late afternoon. At worst, they simply forgot. When I turned 10, I was sitting at breakfast, waiting for at least some sign that this day was special for them. But Mom was busy with David's science project, and Dad was drowning in his newspaper. Only in the evening, having gathered all my courage, I whispered, "Today is my birthday." Dad blinked in surprise. "Oh, right. Happy birthday, baby. We'll buy you something when we get to the mall." But they never did. Only Grandma came that evening, brought a small homemade cupcake with one candle, and whispered, "Make a wish, my dear." And in that brief moment, I felt that I mattered. I have learned to live without expectations, not to expect praise and not to expect recognition. I threw myself into my studies, enrolled in all possible academic clubs, trying to build my personality away from the shadow of David. But I was still invisible at home. And then Grandma got sick. I was 14, David was 16. I spent every day in the hospital, sitting in an uncomfortable chair by her bedside, doing my homework while she was napping. David also visited her, but less often. He had soccer practice, and our parents thought it was more important. One evening, just a few days before her death, Grandma asked us all to gather at her bedside. "Son," she said softly but firmly, looking at Dad, "I want you to promise me something." She paused for a moment, gathering her strength. "Promise me that my inheritance will go to the education of both David and Edwidge. They both need to go to college." Dad took her weak hand and nodded confidently. "Of course, Mom. I promise you, right here, in front of everyone." I wanted to believe it. Wanted. But something in his voice made me doubt it. After my grandmother's death, I plunged into my studies with even greater determination. Although I knew about her inheritance and Dad's promise, I didn't want to take any chances. I wanted to prove that I deserved to go to college on my own merits. My report cards were filled with excellent grades, but no one ever asked about them at home. I'd leave them on the kitchen table, hoping someone would notice, but they invariably ended up buried under the takeaway menus in David's football match schedule. The only person who once proudly hung them on the refrigerator was no longer around. That's why I was looking for other ways to prove to myself and the world that I was worthy of attention. I joined the debate club despite stage fright and the tremor in my voice every time I had to speak in front of an audience. Clear your throat less, Edwidge, my coach was saying. You have a valid argument. Let them hear them. Gradually, my voice became firmer. I learned to speak loudly, confidently, adamantly. But at home, he remained as inconspicuous as ever. I won first place at the state science fair with my project on renewable energy sources. The local newspaper even published a short article about it. I left it on Dad's desk, but it got lost under a stack of unread papers. Meanwhile, every football game of David's got into our family calendar, marked with bright red circles. And then came his graduation. Our usually quiet house has become the center of celebration. Mom had been planning every detail for weeks, from catering to decorating the backyard. We are so proud of you, son, Dad announced solemnly, clinking his glass of champagne. The courtyard was filled with relatives, friends, and neighbors. They congratulated David, admiring the keys to the new car, which he was twirling in his fingers with a lazy grin. I was standing in the corner, clutching a plate of cake. I haven't eaten. Thanks to Mom's legacy, Dad continued, his voice hoarse with emotion, we were able to secure David's future at one of the best colleges in the country. She would be so proud. The guests applauded. 2 months later, the whole family took David to the University of Preston, in a different city from us. Mom and Dad helped him settle into his dorm, took hundreds of photos, and spent 2 more days in the city just to make sure he was settled. After that, our house became a branch of the David campus. Mom and Dad called him every day. Sometimes they turned on the speakerphone so that his voice filled the kitchen during dinner. They went to visit him at least twice a month, and when they returned, they talked about his classes, his friends, and his workouts. What about me? I continued my last year of school alone, studying for my final exams. No one celebrated my victories in competitions. No one asked where I was going to enroll. I wasn't sure if they would let me at all. 2 years passed quickly, and I graduated first in my class. It's not like anyone at home noticed or cared. On graduation day, I wore a white dress and honorary cords. 1. My parents left 3 days earlier for a much-needed vacation with David. We'll bring you a souvenir, Mom said casually, as if missing my graduation was as trivial as forgetting about a family dinner on Tuesday. I sat among my classmates during the ceremony, watching other parents beaming with pride, taking pictures of their children, hugging them, and giving them bouquets. My friend Philomena's mom took me some pictures. Your parents will want to see this, she said, handing me the camera. I couldn't find the strength to tell her the truth. They probably won't want to. While my classmates were celebrating with their families, I went home and started working on college applications. I've been preparing for this moment for months. I've been carefully writing essays, collecting letters of recommendation, and documenting all my academic achievements. The first letters about enrollment started arriving a week later. Evergreen State University offered me a full scholarship and free dorm room. Their letter praised my academic achievements and extracurricular achievements. Then came the enrollment at Blackwood Private College. Their program was exactly what I dreamed of, but the tuition cost turned out to be high. Not as high as at the University of Preston, where David studied, but still significant. I knew that my parents had my share of my grandmother's inheritance. I heard them discussing financial issues, and I knew that the money was waiting for me, just as my grandmother wanted. So I decided to wait for their return. I hid the letter of admission to Blackwood in my desk drawer. Evergreen remained a fallback option. 2 weeks later, my parents returned from vacation, tanned, cheerful, and full of energy. David had already traveled back to Preston to talk to his brothers, as the Pope proudly announced. I waited until dinner was over, when they were relaxed and still sharing their vacation experiences. I got accepted to college, I said, taking advantage of a rare moment of silence. Their business program has a high rating. Mom looked up from her phone for a moment. That's sweet, honey. I felt my mouth go dry, but I continued. I will need to pay for my tuition. I was hoping that we could use my share of my grandmother's inheritance. There was a pause. Not the usual indifferent silence I'm used to, but something else, more difficult. Dad put down his coffee mug and exchanged a glance with Mom. We don't have any money for your education, he said flatly. My fingers turned cold. But my grandmother's inheritance. She made you promise in front of everyone that it would go towards our education. Mom looked a little uncomfortable, but Dad just shrugged. We spent this money on a vacation. The rest went to your brother. He needed more, Mom added, as if that explained everything. Studying in Preston is not getting cheaper. He needs additional support. I stared at them, trying to process what had been said. The room suddenly felt cramped, the air hot. You promised her, my voice was shaking. Grandma made you swear. We were all there. You, Mom, David, I. Dad took another sip of coffee, not even looking at me. I just didn't want to upset Mom in her last days, he said calmly. We knew from the beginning that we wouldn't give you a dime of that money. Something inside me snapped. I've been invisible for 18 years. Swallowed resentment. I accepted their indifference. But now. You're liars, I said, feeling my anger rise. I jumped to my feet so abruptly that the chair fell back with a crash. You betrayed her. You betrayed her dying wish. You spent my money on a vacation. You gave them to David, who has already received his share. You lied to everyone, Grandma, me. Get out, the father's voice was calm, but cold as ice. I froze. What? You heard everything, Mom repeated. I stared at them, unable to believe it. Get out of this house. You're 18, you're an adult, my father added. If you're independent enough to talk to us like that, you can take care of yourself. Before I could answer, Mom grabbed my arm and practically dragged me upstairs to my room. Her fingers dug into my skin, as if I were a naughty child who needed to be restrained. She yanked my old suitcase out from under the bed and threw it at my feet. Pack your things, she said, opening my drawers and unceremoniously pulling out my clothes. I want you to get out of here first thing tomorrow morning. I froze, watching as she pulled out the sliding handle of the suitcase, slammed the closet shut, and threw my books into a pile, not even sorting out what exactly she was throwing out of my life. It was really happening. My own parents kicked me out. Mom. I started, but she looked at me in a way she'd never looked at me before. It was like I was a stranger, an uninvited guest in her house. That's when it dawned on me, they were strangers too. Maybe they've always been strangers. All these years I've been trying to please them, hoping for their love and approval, but now I realized that the people I was so desperate to earn simply didn't exist. They were just two adults who were lucky enough to share DNA with me. I silently packed my clothes, books, laptop, and some old photos of my grandmother into a suitcase. Mom was standing in the doorway with her arms crossed over her chest, as if checking to see if I was stealing anything. It was as if there was something in this house that I wanted to keep for myself. When the suitcase was full, I took out my phone and texted Philomena. Can I come in? It's important. The answer came immediately. Of course. The door is open. I left without saying goodbye. No one tried to stop me. Philomena lived just a few blocks from my former home. Her parents had given her a small apartment for her 18th birthday, and now she was waiting for me at the door. When I arrived, she looked at my suitcase, at my face, and just hugged me. That evening, sitting on her couch with a mug of hot chocolate, I made a decision. I'm going to university. A full scholarship and a free dormitory will be my ticket to a new life. But I needed money for books, for everyday expenses. That's why I got a job at a cafe in the summer. Working in a cafe has taught me more than just making the perfect latte. Between taking orders and balancing the trays, I learned what it means to stand on my own 2 feet. My tips went straight to my savings account, dollar by dollar, and my salary covered basic needs. When autumn finally arrived, I hugged Philomena goodbye and moved into my dorm. My roommate, Sarah, took a look at my meager possessions and, without hesitation, said, "Do you want to use my mini fridge?" I nodded. This gesture, tiny but warm, almost brought me to tears. I found a job at the college library, sorting books, working at the help desk during the evening shifts. Between classes, work, and school, I barely had time to think about my past life. The library has become my refuge, quiet, orderly, predictable. Everything that wasn't in my family. Sometimes relatives called. Their questions sounded strange, unnatural. "Do you have a place to spend the night, dear?" Aunt Linda's voice was full of barely concealed concern. "Are you eating well?" Uncle Bob asked. I answered honestly that I was fine. I was curious about the stories their parents had told them. Philomena sometimes tried to tell me the news about my family. "Hey, I heard that your brother..." But I stopped her before she could finish. "I don't want to know," I said. And she understood. The holidays could be difficult, but Philomena's family wouldn't let me spend them alone. The first Christmas in their house, I sat at their dining table, surrounded by warmth and sincere affection. Philomena's father, Mr. Brocky, took me aside after dinner. "Edwidge," he said, his voice serious but friendly, "I've watched you work hard. When you graduate from university, there will always be a place for you in my company, if that's what you want." I froze, and then nodded hurriedly, unable to find the words. Tears threatened to pour out. Finally someone noticed my efforts, my determination, my struggle for a place in this world. Graduation came faster than I expected. I was standing on the stage, accepting my diploma with honors, and out of habit I looked around the crowd. Philomena and her parents were there. They applauded loudly enough to drown out the entire hall. I wasn't looking for other familiar faces. My first day at the company. I walked into the office in a suit I'd bought with the money I'd saved up for my evening shifts at the library. During the first 6 months, I performed a variety of tasks, worked longer than anyone else, and quickly earned a reputation for taking on problems that others couldn't handle. By the second year, I already had my own team. Mr. Brocky's face was not deceived in me. Raises and salary increases followed by themselves. Soon, I was earning more than I could ever have dreamed of back in the days when I was counting tips in a cafe. I bought professional clothes, started going to yoga classes, and went on vacation with Philomena to places I'd only seen in magazines before. My birthdays were no longer a reminder of neglect. Philomena organized cozy parties, only close friends from work, good food, sincere laughter. No awkward family gatherings, no pretense, no pain. My 27th birthday was approaching. But I had a secret that I hid even from Philomena. For the last 5 years, I've been saving every extra penny. Christmas bonuses, bonuses for great work, even money that I could spend on lunches by bringing sandwiches from home instead of buying them at the cafe on the ground floor of the office. Every dollar went into my special savings account, marked with one word, dream. And this dream has become a reality. 3 weeks before my birthday, I was standing in an empty living room with high ceilings and huge windows. The midday sun gilded the parquet floors, making them look like the surface of water. I signed the documents. The realtor smiled and, handing me the keys, said, "Congratulations. It's all yours." I squeezed the cold metal in my fingers, and suddenly a wave of emotions washed over me. My own apartment. Not a rental home, not a temporary shelter. a place that belongs to me. That night, feeling a little cocky, and maybe a little proud, I did something I usually avoided. I posted a post on social media. In the photo, I was standing in my empty but beautiful living room. The keys were dangling from my fingers, and I couldn't help but smile. The caption was simple. An early birthday present to myself. Dreams come true if you work hard enough. Likes and comments started pouring in almost immediately. Philomena, of course, was the first. I can't wait for the housewarming party. My colleagues joined in with their congratulations. And then I saw them. Relatives I haven't heard from in years. They liked the post and left comments. So proud of you. Happy early birthday. As if their absence in my life had never existed. I was sitting at my desk at work a week later, looking through the quarterly reports, when the phone rang. An unfamiliar number. But I recognized that voice right away. Edwidge, honey. His mother's voice, sweet and sticky as honey, poured out of the speaker. I saw your beautiful new apartment on Facebook and suddenly remembered that your birthday is coming soon. I suddenly remembered. After so many years of forgotten dates, after so many birthdays spent alone. It's great to see that you're doing well. She continued, and there was an enthusiasm in her voice that I had never heard addressed to me before. Your father and I thought we should celebrate your birthday properly this year. At home. We will invite the whole family. I almost laughed out loud. Years of silence, indifference, and complete lack of interest in my life, and now that I have a luxury apartment, I suddenly become worthy of attention. Worthy of celebration. We've missed you so much, darling, she added. I could almost imagine her standing by the window, holding the phone to her ear, a rehearsed worried expression on her face. It's time for the family to get back together. What do you say? I should have said no. I should have told her what I thought. But instead, I heard it coming out of my mouth. Of course, Mom. Why not? When I hung up, I was smiling. But there was no warmth in that smile. I wanted to see what kind of game they were playing. On the day of the dinner party, I drove up to my parents' house in my new Mercedes. The soft rumble of the engine cut through the frozen air. I parked and got out, slowly, giving myself a second to evaluate. The house looked worse than I remembered, peeling paint, overgrown lawn, tiles that were missing from the roof. They were already at the door. My parents' eyes first focused on my car. Then at my perfectly fitting designer suit. Then back to the car. I saw that gleam in their eyes. Calculating. Edwidge. Mom rushed to me with hugs, so enthusiastically that I almost backed away. Dad looked me up and down, taking a step back as if trying to keep his cool. You look expensive, he murmured. They both seemed older than I remembered them. He had more gray hair, deep wrinkles, and shoulders that slouched slightly from the weight of his years. But it was even worse inside. The futuristic design interior that I imagined in their house was replaced by worn furniture, worn carpet, and a muted smell of the past. And there, sprawled on the couch, as if he had never left, was David. He gained weight, lost his hair. He was sitting idly looking at his phone next to a young woman whose rounded belly stretched the fabric of her dress. Hey, sis, he said, not bothering to stand up. Meet Sarah, my wife. Mom hurriedly intervened, with an appearance of concern, but her voice trembled on the verge of justification. David is living with us temporarily. Well, college wasn't exactly his thing, but he has promising job prospects. 9 years of prospects, I thought. But his face remained impassive. The guests will be here soon, my father said, nodding at the table piled high with food. But first, tell us about your work. Mom took a step closer, as if approaching carefully. I knew that tone. It's a beautiful car, my father said thoughtfully. You must be making good money. It's okay, I replied smoothly, avoiding the question. Catering looks good, but what exactly are you doing? Mom pushed harder. Your apartment must be worth a fortune. And the Mercedes. I smiled politely. I work in the department. How is everyone doing? Before they could dig deeper, the doorbell rang. The house was filled with relatives. Aunts, uncles, cousins, faces I haven't seen in almost 10 years. They surrounded me with hugs and exclamations, as if we had always been one big happy family. And then Aunt Rosaria came up to me. Her voice was quieter than the others. I'm so glad you finally came to your senses, darling, she whispered, squeezing my hand warmly. I froze. She looked around before continuing, almost conspiratorially. Your parents were so worried. It must have been hard to live like this. I frowned. How so? She looked at me with genuine sympathy. Well, after you ran off with that guy who lived on the streets and refused to work. I felt something snap inside of me. She patted my hand. But look at you now. Clean, respectable. I took a slow breath. That's it. Everything fell into place. While I was building a career, getting promotions, and buying an apartment, my family was telling a different story. The story where I ran away. A story where I got lost. A story in which I didn't exist until it became profitable to remember me. My parents used to tell stories about their shameful, runaway daughter. Their version of events portrayed them as worried, abandoned parents who simply didn't know how to reach a wayward child. And I played into their hands by cutting off contact with my family. As soon as everyone sat down at the table, Dad stood up and raised his glass. We're here today to celebrate our wonderful daughter, he announced, his voice hoarse with fake emotion. We are so proud of who she has become. Mom dabbed at her eyes with a napkin. I remembered that rehearsal. I saw her dozens of times at school plays in my childhood. A family should stick together, she said, reaching across the table. I didn't take it. She kept her hands in her lap. This is the most important thing. A family that supports each other. Support. The emphasis on this word was not accidental. As did her quick glance at my expensive watches and jewelry. Your father and I, my mother continued, sobbing. We always knew that you would succeed. I let the silence hang in the air. And then she stood up slowly, smoothing the hem of her dress. Thank you all for coming. I spoke calmly, in an even voice. It's interesting that my parents remembered my birthday this year. The room became quiet. The mother's fake tears disappeared instantly. You know, they never celebrated my birthdays when I was a kid. Not a single one. I looked at each of them. But it seems that an apartment in a prestigious area and a Mercedes car make birthdays more memorable, don't they? Edwidge, Dad said, frowning warningly. Now is not the time. Oh, but now is the time. I looked around the table. Aunt Rosaria told me something interesting. The woman tensed. Apparently, I ran away from home at the age of 18 with some guy, became homeless, refused to work. I laughed, but there was no humor in it. I'd love to hear more about this mysterious bad guy I supposedly ran away with. Mom shuddered. Honey, the past is the past. I didn't let her get away with answering. The past? Let's not distort the truth. I raised my voice, drowning out her restless muttering. I was kicked out of the house the day after graduation. I turned to my relatives. Does anyone want to know why? David shifted in his seat. Several people exchanged glances. They remembered. I'll remind you. My voice was steely. Our grandmother was promised on her deathbed. I looked directly at my father. You promised that her inheritance would pay for college for both me and David. I paused. But instead you spent my share on a vacation. Everyone in the room froze. And the rest went to David. I looked at my brother. Do you even know that my parents kicked me out when I dared to ask where my part was? Mom turned pale. That's not true. Her voice was weak. But she couldn't finish her sentence. Because I knew it was true. I looked around. I saw the recognition in the eyes of my relatives. They knew. I went to college on my own merits. I succeeded on my own. Built a career. I looked around at them. And I haven't received a call in 9 years. I've never heard "Happy Birthday." I haven't bought the apartment you saw on Facebook yet. Silence. A deafening, viscous silence. Aunt Rosaria looked at her parents with undisguised disgust. Uncle Bob shook his head slowly. I took my purse. Sorry for ruining this wonderful party. I took a step back. But I thought you all deserved to hear the truth. I looked at Mom and Dad. I didn't come back for reconciliation. I smiled. I came back to fix everything. The trip home was liberating. Everything was ready in my apartment. I ordered a catered dinner a few days ago. I knew how this evening would end. Philomena arrived first. Behind her are my colleagues, my real friends. We ate, laughed, and raised our glasses. It wasn't just my birthday that we celebrated. We celebrated my freedom from their lies. That evening, the messages started coming in. Mom begged me to change my mind. Dad admitted that they were wrong. David asked for help with his temporary situation. I blocked them one by one. Write a comment on what you think about this story and don't forget to subscribe to the channel and like it. See you soon.